Welcome to this session. Our thanks to our sponsor, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and to our hosts, the International Economic Forum of the Americas. We work in the Americas, part of ICA. You heard our host, so ICA is the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture, based in Costa Rica. And so I'm the head of the Canadian delegation in Ottawa. And our Director General, Dr. Manuel Otero, he sends his regards and regrets he could not be here with us today. But it's my pleasure to moderate this session. We have three wonderful panelists. Before I go over to them, I did want to say a quick word in terms of the three pillars. And you saw the title of the entire event is prosperity. And you can't do that if you don't include sustainability. And what is sustainability? And we could focus on many issues of sustainability, and there are too much in 45 minutes for us to cover all the ground. And most people tend to think of environmental sustainability. That's the first one that comes to mind often, not economic, and even the lesser known social sustainability. And to give you an example, at least from the Americas where I work, and that's from Canada to Argentina, that includes the Caribbean, we work in 34 member countries, and all the ministers of agriculture sit on our board of directors. Canada is the second largest contributor, partner to ICA. And we're part of the Inter-American system. It's like the UN system, but only the Americas. And agriculture development and rural well-being are the mandate of ICA. And so during COVID, and you heard this session this morning with the ambassadors earlier at 7:30, quite early, but the impact was massive. Millions of job losses, and GDP's gone down, exports have gone down, except agriculture. It's a very, very resilient sector. It's the only sector that actually saw growth in the Americas during the crisis. The same thing happened in the financial crisis 13 years ago. When I was studying Canada and I was looking at all the different industries as head of food research at Conference Board, you saw the ag sector, the agri-food sector did well, performed much, much better. And a big thank you during COVID to all of our food heroes. And so to give you an idea of the three pillars, in the Caribbean, COVID kind of killed off tourism for a while. It's coming back. But it became an economic sustainability issue because of the loss of revenues, the loss of incomes, which then became a social sustainability issue because it became a food insecurity issue, not to be confused with food safety. Often people think of food safety and food security. I still get the discussion with members of parliament or the press, and so there's a distinction there. And you overlay that with environmental sustainability issues. The Caribbean is affected by hurricane season every year, June to November. And then you have a volcano this year, or you have an earthquake in Haiti. ICA is there, we're helping those countries, but it gives you a sense of all the issues. If you want to be smart about the sector, if you want to be resilient, if you want to be, what's the key word out of the president of Colombia yesterday used sustainability in his talk. I thought it was pretty cool. So that was my key takeaway yesterday from his talk anyway. But so I wanted to give you, the focus is not going to be about Latin America. I wish it could be, but we only have 40 minutes. And with our three panelists, we decided we're going to have a Canadian perspective. And so I'm going to pass over the floor to Evan Fraser, Dr. Fraser from Guelph University. I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves. And I'm going to, I have many themes, many questions for them. And I hope this session will be of great value to you. Over to you, Evan.
So thanks very much, JC, and wonderful. My name's Evan Fraser. I'm director of Arrol Food Institute at the University of Guelph. I have a number of positions of a policy nature. I co-chair the Canadian Food Policy Advisory Council, for instance, and this is actually Zoom hour number 4 for me today. I just wrapped up a long meeting with the European Commission's high-level panel of experts on food systems science, which I'm the only Canadian representative. So I get to participate in a lot of these high-level discussions, which is really fun. And I was delighted when JC asked me to provide some sort of high-level introductory remarks. And at a high level, the trends facing the world's food system are fairly ominous and depressing. Probably everybody knows the world's population is rising, currently at 8 billion. There's some debate as to how much the population will rise to, but expected to be somewhere between 9.5 and 11 billion later this century. Probably more like 10, but who knows? The Economist magazine tried to put this into context for food systems and argued that over the next generation, this means that farmers will have to, over the next generation, produce more food than farmers ever have in the history of farming. So more food has to be produced. Just let that roll around in your head for a second. More food has to be produced in the next generation than all of human agricultural history combined. And of course, at the same time, climate change threatens to make food harder and more expensive to produce. But we also live in this paradoxical world where for the last 6 years, both hunger and obesity have been rising. So this brings in that social dimension of sustainability. Somewhere between a third and the half of the world's food is wasted on its journey from farm to fork. And then we have to ask serious questions about whether the food we produce is actually healthy or nutritious. And again, the data is, quite frankly, depressing. There's a mismatch, I would say, between what we produce and what we know we should be eating. For instance, there's approximately 5 times too much starch and fat being produced on the planet as compared with what nutritionists recommend we consume. And we overproduce sugars that we all should be cutting back on. Meanwhile, we would actually have to triple fruit and vegetable production if everyone on the planet were to eat, say, the Canadian Food Guide's recommendations. So a real mismatch there. And then, of course, there's the toll that agriculture takes on the environment. A report released yesterday suggests that the contribution of the world's food system to greenhouse gases has risen significantly over the last 25 years. That was a report put out in association with the COPs meeting in Glasgow. And the ballpark figures about a third of the world's greenhouse gas emissions come from the agriculture and agri-food sector. And then, of course, there's the impact agriculture has on biodiversity and water pollution, etc. And when you add all that stuff up, it's really hard for me anyways, despite my enthusiasm, not to get kind of depressed. As it constitutes today, or as constituted today, I would argue that food systems first fail to provide adequate nutrition for a vast number of people on the planet. What food we had is badly distributed. Farmers are vulnerable to climate change. They contribute to climate change. And the food we produce actually drives some of our most serious public health issues. Despite all that, however, I remain extremely optimistic about the future. And the reason that I feel optimism has 2 very distinct dimensions, each of which the 2 panelists, Lenore and Suzie, will speak to. So to sort of set the other 2 speakers on this panel up, I'd like to just presage what Suzie is going to say and talk a little bit about the work that she knows best, which has often been talked about in the media or by advocates as regenerative agriculture. Now, I'll be honest, as a scientist, I find the phrase regenerative agriculture a little vague, a little frustrating to use. It basically means, I think, agriculture that's good for the environment in that it improves soil health by building up organic matter. It captures greenhouse gases and it enhances biodiversity. Depending on who's defining it, I think regenerative agriculture can mean in things like complex crop rotation, so putting more plants into a rotation, reducing the amount of tillage or the amount of disturbance that happens in a soil, enhancing the use of organic matter, reducing chemical inputs, and mixing livestock together with crops more efficiently as a way of recycling nutrients. Now, from coast to coast to coast, across Canada, across the world, everybody from major industry players to organic agricultural activists promote regenerative agriculture as a way of showing how adopting these sort of types of crop practices that may have been common a generation ago or 2 or 3 generations ago really can turn cropping systems from being part of the problem of the world's environmental problems to a driver in the solutions. So that's the first reason I'm optimistic, is this idea of regenerative agriculture that Suzie's going to talk about. The second reason that I'm optimistic is really a topic that Lenore, the third speaker, knows best. Right now, I believe we are in the beginning stages of what can only be called a digital agricultural revolution. in that the same technologies that created the internet and are transforming medicine, those same technologies that resulted in a handful of COVID vaccines being developed in remarkably short time, those same technologies are now being applied in the food system, on our farms, in our food processing factories, in our grocery stores. And in particular, there's extremely rapid innovations in two areas that I'm tracking really closely. And the first is called controlled environment agriculture. And that can refer to anything from a fancy greenhouse all the way through to a vertical farm where plants are produced indoors with LED lighting. And I think those technologies are advancing so fast that we can start to imagine a future where even a country like Canada with its winter could potentially have year-round production of carbon-neutral fruits and vegetables anywhere, any crop, anytime. And that phrase is something that I've heard Lenore say quite a few times. Sorry, Lenore, if I'm stealing some of your best lines. Anyway, we're not quite there yet, but as Lenore's going to tell us, the technologies are changing so fast that might not be an unrealistic goal in the near future. Similarly, there's a revolution happening in terms of our protein systems. Every week I go to the local grocery store in Guelph, Ontario, and it seems there's some new protein product available on the market. These might be a plant-based product, or the ingredients may come from sort of a laboratory, such as cellular agriculture, or proteins that maybe are fermented in ways that are more similar to brewing beer than producing traditional livestock. At any rate, across these sort of the protein area and then across the technologies that are being developed, I increasingly think that we are on the cusp of a transformation of the protein sector that offers significant sustainability benefits, and it offers significant threats to the current industry. So we have to be mindful of the disruption this can cause. And we've all lived through major technological disruptions in our lives, such as the demise of Blockbuster and the crushing of the value of taxi medallions in light of online streaming of video and Uber-like models. So I think agriculture, and in particular protein, may be facing that kind of moment, and carefully navigated with the right kind of policy, we'll see benefits, but it won't be easy. Now, each of these topics, regenerative agriculture on one hand, digital agriculture on the other, are super complicated. They require careful thought, lots of unpacking. But both represent, I think, huge tools and forces of change in the food system. And that's why I was grateful when JC asked me to provide simply high-level remarks, then pass the torch over to Suzie and Lenore, the real experts who will provide you with some more details. So back to you, JC. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Evan. Excellent opening remarks and visionary comments. I wanted to raise the issue about sustainability here because there's going to be more pressure on Canada, on the Americas, to produce more food. And we have to be more responsible and smarter in how we do it. And the rest of the world is going to grow, like Evan was saying, to maybe 10 billion at the end of the century. And in fact, this generation, everyone in this room, we're only going to know population growth. Maybe mid-century, Lancet and others, so that will start declining. But there's going, as a breadbasket, as the Americas, as Canada, are a breadbasket for the world because we produce more than the population that we have, and so we can export. And there's greater demand from growing incomes in Asia, for instance. And so there's going to be more pressure on us to produce. And we can't really extensify. There's not that much more agricultural land available, so we have to intensify, but we have to be smarter and more responsible how we do it. And so I'd like to pass it over to Suzie, and if you could introduce yourself, please, and speak to regenerative agriculture.
Good morning, everybody. I am Suzie Miller. I am the Executive Director of the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Crops, and that's a full supply chain organization that is focused on enhancing the sustainability of the production of grains, oilseeds, and special crops. So Evan mentioned regenerative and how regenerative is a non-scientific term that is highly interpretable. So I am going to interpret regeneration as regeneration of the soil and the resources that are required to, over the long term, sustainably continue to produce food. So it's nothing specific. It is about having preserving and enhancing the resource, the soil from which our plant food comes, and the sustainability, as Jean-Charles mentioned, is also connected to the environmental sustainability is connected to the economic sustainability and vice versa. So what do I see in the future in terms of crop production and sustainability and regeneration? What I see is that farmers are recognized for the work that they do and for the contribution that they already make, but the contribution they will continue to make and increasingly make to contribute to both the social sustainability, but also the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. I see that they have the tools and the technology that Nora's going to talk about to be able to accomplish that. It's no easy task. As Jean-Charles mentioned, it's very complex. The whole crop production system is very complex, with the added complexity of the impact of climate change. We've seen this on regarding drought this year throughout the whole country, actually. The second sort of condition for success, besides the tool and the technology, is the research and the analysis that comes from that research on what are the best practices in what conditions. Because I'm talking about cropping system that's done outdoors, it isn't controllable, and the soils, climate, topography, scale of crop farming varies considerably across the country. So a solution for Ontario is not the same solution for Saskatchewan. So the analysis, and I'm an economist by training, so I think that's very critical, but also the agronomics, the science behind the solutions. It's very, very critical to continue the work that's being done, but also to explore new avenues, particularly those solutions that have been identified, such as cover cropping, intercropping, that sort of thing. Flexibility. As I said, what works in one situation doesn't work in another. The solutions need to be geared towards conventional farming, organic farming, those who adopt no-till systems where the soil is the seeds are directly injected into the soil, versus those that use the type of practices that are still common throughout the world. So again, just to finish off, I think that there has been a lot of progress made. If you take a look at soil health, for example, soil erosion in Canada has reduced significantly over the last 20 years because of the adoption of no-till technology. Still have a ways to go. There's still lots of potential, but this is something the whole world needs to be interested in because everybody eats. And as Jean-Charles indicated, we do supply with a relatively small environmental footprint, grains, oilseeds, pulses for the rest of the world. Back to you, Jean-Charles.
Thanks, Suzie. And she's absolutely right, because everything we do has an environmental footprint. Every plate, every meal that we eat has an environmental footprint along the supply chain. And another key word that I want you to take away from Suzie's talk is solutions. And I would say that at COP25, I know the big momentum now is COP26, but I mean, before COVID in Spain, agriculture was not viewed positively. It was viewed as a problem. And the key messaging we need to bring now is agriculture is part of the solution. And that's what IEFA did in New York a few weeks ago at the UN Food Systems Summit. We kept pushing for messaging around farmers first. Agriculture is part of the solution, and we're doing that in Glasgow. We also signed an MOU with Ohio State University and Dr. Ratan Lau. He's the World Food President winner from last year. And the idea is to address soil health. You can't achieve the SDG goals without proper soil health. You can't achieve food security without proper soil health. And yet, the soil degradation is a major, major issue in environmental sustainability across all the Americas, including Canada. Water erosion, acidification, desertification, deforestation, and salinity, and other ones. We've got work to do. And so I'd like to pass it over to Lenore. I know it's a bit early for you. I really appreciate you getting up this early in your time. Please.
No problem, and thank you, and welcome. I'm talking this morning from the unceded territories of the Squamish people out here in beautiful British Columbia. And I'm Lenore Newman. I am the director of the Food and Agriculture Institute at the University of the Fraser Valley. And like everyone on the call, I wear a number of hats. And most of my work is applied, mostly working with industry and with government, looking at policy around agricultural innovation. And my background is actually I'm a physicist by training, and sort of bring that lens. So I'm the tech girl on today's program. And from my point of view, I'd like to echo something Evan said, which is agriculture is changing. And agriculture is, of course, always changing, but we've entered a period where the rate of change is so fast that we can call it disruptive. And my job involves tracking a number of those shifts, including the rise of indoor agriculture, shifting protein production, and increased expansion of precision agriculture. And because it's such a short little period, I wanted today to talk a little bit about vertical or indoor agriculture, or what some people are calling local intensive indoor production of food, and why it really could change the landscape in Canada for the better. So field production of vegetables is a very old technology, but increasingly it is becoming a problematic one. And that is in terms of climate impact of growing, say, for example, leafy greens, which I'm going to use as an advantage or as an example outside. Water use, which is very high labor to get that food to market, and a lot of pesticides and herbicides to produce a product in our supermarket that is palatable. And at the same time, demand for leafy greens, small fruit, vegetable is rising, which is a really good thing because we should be eating more of it, as Evan pointed out. And I always like to say it's the sector that everyone forgets about, and that there are sugar lobbies and subsidies for meat and dairy and grains. And the poor old broccoli farmer or the lettuce farmer, they're just out there every day churning out a product that we really want, and no one ever helps them. And it's kind of sad. But also what we saw in the pandemic, long chain. And so here in BC gets almost all of its leafy greens from California. It takes about 8 days to get the crop from field to here, by which time it only has about 2 days of shelf life, which means if you buy lettuce here, you got to use it really quickly. And also incredible food waste in that chain. Here, the processors who receive that lettuce from California, right away, right out of the box, before it even gets to the consumer, they throw away 30%. They have to pull 30% off each head of lettuce, throw it away because it isn't suitable. So there's got to be a better way. And on a bigger scheme of things, we also know we're using too much land in general to produce things in a wasteful manner. So that takes us to indoor. And the idea that Evan mentioned that we could grow things any time of year right where they need to be and really improve the numbers around climate impact. And so if I look at lettuce, which is my pet example today, what we've seen that's created this kind of, I like to call it, instead of a revolution, a renaissance, is rapidly, exponentially dropping costs of LED lighting, rapidly evolving technology to fine-tune indoor growing, to fine-tune nutrients. And we also have another renaissance I'll mention briefly, which is an absolute sea change in genomics, the actual genetics of how plants are bred. And of course, for the last 1,000 years, we've been doing a form of genomics to produce field crops. But now we can fine-tune those crops for indoor production. And so you might say, well, Lenore, well, that sounds neat, and I know there's these little operations, but how is this going to scale? How does this take over from that $1.2 billion worth of California produce that's kind of shaky right now that we're worried about? Well, the answer is it's now become economically competitive to grow indoors, and the environmental benefit is vast. I'm currently working with a company that can produce 200 acres worth of field crop lettuce on 1 acre, which represents this massive freeing up of land that can be used for things like rewilding or regenerative agriculture. Water use is about 5% of field grown. Pesticides, herbicides are gone, no more. And to the point where in the US, indoor hydroponic lettuce can be grown in a way that is classed as organic. In Canada, that hasn't quite come yet. They're still working on the regulations. One of the cleverer ways, because one of the critiques I often get is, but using a ton of chemicals as input into the hydroponics. But the nice thing is, you can actually source those inputs from food waste. So one of the companies I work with actually takes all the trimmings and food waste from food processors and turns it into the fertilizer you need to grow the lettuce hydroponically. It's that closed loop that we can achieve. Crop quality is vastly superior. Nutrients are superior. And of course, you can harvest and it's ready same day. So the consumer suddenly has 10 days to eat their lettuce instead of 2. The other thing we're seeing in that thing, because the choke point for indoor as well as for field grown is labor. And the last thing I'll mention, because time does tick along on this, is we're having a labor crisis right across, the entire developed world. Agriculture was already having that crisis before the pandemic, and now it's just worse. Indoors, we can shift almost everything to autonomous so that our farmer looks quite different. They don't have to be doing the hard work of actually trimming and picking and packing. And what that means is we will be able to produce a product where the consumer is the first person to touch it. And so no more worry about foodborne illness, much better product, and much different labor. And there's one philosophical thing I want to touch on. A lot of the work I do with government policy asks a really interesting question. What is a farmer? And going forward, farming is going to look very different. And a farmer might look more like a physicist or a computer scientist or a data analysis or an engineer. But they're still farmers. And a box full of lettuce is still a farm. And I think it's just a really neat time to be in this industry because it's moving so quickly. And so I'm also optimistic. That's what I'll close on. I think my prediction I made, I was on a talk yesterday where they asked me to make one prediction. I predict in 10 years, all leafy greens in Canada will be produced locally right at the market year round. That's my big prediction for the day. And with that, I'll turn it back over.
Oh, I love it, Dr. Newman. I think we will chat again in 10 years to double check that prediction. Very exciting. I hope that you get a sense of the value of technology as part of that solution, as part of the transformation that Evan was speaking to at the UN Food Systems Summit. That was the main theme, transformation. And really, technology is so important, and there's demand across the Americas. And you've been here, I hope you were able to attend yesterday. I mean, what did you hear from, say, Paul Soubry? in the tech sector or the GM vice president. Or you were hearing Murid Al-Khatib, and you were hearing Bruce Power. They're attracting youth. Tech is exciting. We want to hire you. And the fellow from Bruce Power is like, we got 29,000 applications for 500 jobs. The ag sector has that. It's exciting. It has tech. There are jobs there for youth. Come. You heard the automation. With Internet of Things, cloud technologies, robotics, tech drones, and the list goes on. And I can't insist on this enough. We need to attract more people to the sector. Just at farm gate sales, the fact that we don't have 60,000 workers, there's about over $2 billion in losses in farm gate sales. Delayed production. There's a major impact. It's not just manual labor. There's a whole slew of other things we need to do. We need to double our investments in R&D in ag. We need to do more. We have the superclusters. They're fantastic. But my next question to the panel is, how can we foster additional food innovation, agriculture innovation in this country? Evan, over to you.
Well, I think there's a couple of enabling factors that have to be undertaken if we want to accelerate ag innovation. The first is a policy regulatory framework that I think puts a value on environmental problems and environmental pollution. So a tax or a pricing mechanism for carbon, I think, would unlock a huge shift in how we produce food. Maple Leaf Foods, Canada's largest food processor, one of the world's largest meat processors, is the world's first large carbon neutral food manufacturing company. A price on, and they're doing that for sustainability reasons. They're also doing that because that, I think, is where they think the market is heading. A price on carbon would be one of the key factors that would reward companies like Maple Leaf for taking that step, and would lead other companies down the same pathway. So, price on pollution. Second thing, training and engagement. We need to be training the next generation of farmers to be astronauts, essentially, which means integrating both traditional ag science disciplines with STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, and also layering in an explicit curriculum around conflict resolution, communication, critical thinking, those foundational skills that every workplace study in agriculture or otherwise says the youth need to have. So, price on pollution, an emphasis on training and novel programs that bring new disciplines together. And then the third thing I think that would be required to unlock innovation is a way of de-risking capital to flow into the space. So capital is flowing into ag tech, and every year for the last 5 years, we see more venture capital money going into it. It's still a drop in the ocean compared with the amount of venture capital that flows into, say, medicine or biotech or ICT. So we need to be de-risking, I think, investments in this space, acknowledging that an investment in ag tech may be a longer ROI than many investors are expecting. That is, we're talking about biological systems, so there's some inherent risks associated with developing new crops as opposed to new software. And I think there's a strong role that government can play in de-risking capital flowing into the space. So those would be my 3 recommendations, JC. I'll interested to see what other folks say.
Suzie, Lenore?
In terms of, sort of where I think the farming population in Canada is 250,000 individual small businesses. Some are smaller than others, but essentially by the criteria about which we measure business size, they're small. And in terms of adopting that technology and moving forward, there needs to be a better understanding of the costs and the benefits. It's okay to have the innovation there. And there's a lot of money, both from farmers' side and, although, as Evan says, there could be more, invested in the development of that technology. But the next step is that adoption. And if you don't have the economics right, if you don't have the incentives, both economic and maybe some other form, then that innovation is not going to be able to be effectively used. So that connectivity between the scientist and the user, I think needs to be stronger so that the investment in innovation is responding to what the need is out there, and not trying to adopt or promote a solution for where there isn't a problem.
Lenore.
Yeah, it's a really important and critical question. And to me, I think number one, all levels of government need to realize this is a race. And we need to actually run if we're going to compete. And when I look around the world, I see governments that are doubling down on producing food and being food superpowers. I mean, the Netherlands has a 50-year head start, and they've made it one of their key policy pieces is their sort of golden triangle of agriculture, education, and innovation incubation. So they have these three pillars that they really focus on, and they call it a top sector. Agriculture is a top sector that gets preferential treatment. And if we look at newcomers like Israel, like Singapore, the thing you notice about them, they don't have land. It's hard for them to compete in this space. And so they're building a really solid ecosystem. We need to really work on that. And there are two specific places I think we need to work. Number one is talent. We need to focus on growing talent, and that starts really early. One of our problems is agriculture is seen as a sunset industry because right from kindergarten onward, young people are exposed to agriculture as, the red barn and the grandparents and, a few chickens pecking around. And we need to get across that this is a highly technological industry. And it might seem a little trite, but actually one of my colleagues at the Institute did a study of children's books that reflect agriculture. And out of 50 books, they were all small use, mid-use farms or mixed use farms. Not a single greenhouse, not one. And I'm like, this is a fundamental failure that goes right through up to post-secondary. Agriculture does not get the respect it deserves. And when I go around the world and see young people excited to be in ag tech, to be in agriculture, I really feel we need to basically think about that in a big way in Canada. And then the next thing is we are actually very good at starting companies. Startup culture in Canada is very good. We have a lot of support. Where we fall down a bit in this sector is acceleration. A lot of our ag tech startups, we start them, we incubate them, they're doing great, then they move to the States, which always is going to happen. But we need to support them in that scaling section to make sure more of them actually stay. And then if we're also creating the talent to feed those companies, it's going to be a win. So that's kind of the drum I beat all the time is we need to be thinking about training and incubation acceleration. And if we do that, we can compete. And if we don't do that, we'll be buying our food from other countries, which in my view is not the best way to make sure you're food secure.
Excellent arguments, Lenore, and everyone, actually. And Lenore is right. Like, if you look at the Netherlands, they're a gorgeous, very inspirational model for the rest of the planet. And they're the size of the GTA, and then the second largest exporter. So we've got work to do in this country. And we only have 8 minutes left, so I thought we might play a little game. I love role-playing. I'm a big D&D fan. I still have my dice. But I know, let's say, to give you an example, I was at the Ottawa airport in line going to Toronto, and besides me, about 7 years ago, the Prime Minister now, Justin Trudeau, he was standing right beside me. And I was like, what do? I only have 2 minutes, so I want to say something, get something across to him. And I have to be like, if you play Fortnite, it's, no scope, team swipe kind of argument. And you want to say, okay, food's important, so you look, and he's really tall, you look at him. And so, Monsieur Trudeau, and I said, I have something for you because I just finished a food strategy at the Conference Board for Canada. So I had elements to argue in 2 pages, and I think Canada needs a food policy. And, it's one of the most, if not the most important economic sector for this country. It employs so many people. We need support, and it can buy votes. And so, that was my pitch in 30 seconds. So let's say for the 3 panelists, you are in this building, in the elevator, and Minister Bibeau walks in, and you've got 30 seconds with her. What do you say? Evan?
Well, on the theme of this conference, and picking up on what Lenore and Suzie said, I would bet on agriculture. I would bet on it as a vehicle for green economic growth. I would direct funding towards ag technology, specifically in urban and peri-urban areas. And I would provide an eco-fiscal incentive for farmers to embrace regenerative agriculture. So that's a portfolio of options, but that's the direction I would take.
Suzie?
Don't cut back on research. It's absolutely critical to get us where we need to go. Be open, be flexible. Encourage, facilitate collaboration among industry, between industry and government. And right along the supply chain, do what you can to open the minds all along there so that we can utilize and work on the solutions together. Collaboration is absolutely the key.
Lenore?
I don't even think I need 30 seconds. My elevator pitch would be, the biggest story of the 21st century in agriculture is going to be the complete revolution in protein production, and ignore it at your peril.
And so, and she may respond, we have the Barton Report. We have aspirational targets. We want to export over 75 billion in food. And how do we stay sustainable? Evan?
So, for the audience's benefit, the Barton Report came out about 5 years ago, and it was commissioned by then Minister Morneau to make recommendations on how to grow Canada's economy. And one of the chapters in the Barton Report said, bet on agriculture food, grow our exports, and focus on becoming the world's, and the key quote that gets often talked about is the world's trusted supplier of safe, sustainable food for the 21st century. For me, to realize the vision articulated by that Barton Report, the Advisory Council for Economic Growth, you need to have transparent, robust, transferable data lines that actually back up the claims of trusted, safe, and sustainable, and turn that out of a potentially greenwashing exercise into something that is a real defendable branding position. And I very much think that is that creating systems to provide trust around safety and sustainability is a crucial bottleneck. We're better on having lines and systems to demonstrate safety. We are much farther behind on having systems to demonstrate and prove out our claims around sustainability.
Excellent, Evan. Good. Suzie?
I totally agree with Evan regarding the necessity for measure. You don't know what you're doing right. You don't know what you're doing wrong until you can actually analyze the situation as it currently exists and then look for a target. I think that, the Barton Report is great. It's one target, but there are all sorts of little targets within that, and there are consequences. The necessity to intensify at the same time as enhance the sustainability, we haven't had those conversations as to actually how to bring together all of those competing priorities, which is feeding ourselves, feeding the world, doing it sustainably, keeping farmers as a viable occupation, attracting the capital that's required. And I don't really see a place right now where we can have those solid conversations and, may I say, negotiations about what steps need to be taken to achieve all of these. I'm not going to say competing, and they're not mutually exclusive, but they're not identical goals. And what may help us in one area, like enhancing our exports, may hurt in another, like reducing our GHG emissions.
Excellent points. Lenore?
Yeah, I think my response to that is reports are fine, and you can always start the fire with them if nothing else. But there needs to be actual boots on the ground. And if you look at Canada, if you look at the budget for ag compared to other ministries, if you look across the provinces at their budgets, you can see a sort of systematic underinvestment in agriculture. And to echo Suzie's earlier comment about research, we don't even have a funding body in Canada for agriculture that's focused compared to, say, the USDA in the US. There's bits and pieces. And so if I was a government trying to prove I actually care about this industry, one of the first things I would do is just put all the bits and pieces together and really double down on agriculture. And at the end of the day, that investment needs to be there to back up reports. Otherwise, there's a lot of reports we have that sit on shelves gathering dust. And there has to be that concentrated action to put resources there to actually build an ecosystem.
Excellent thought leadership to all three of you. I've really been enjoying this, and I feel that we need more time. But we only have 1 minute, so I'm going to thank the panelists, thank the organizers. It's been very enjoyable. I hope you've retained many elements. And you, as consumers, as eaters, you also have a role in sustainability. And there's such a thing as sustainable consumption. And you have a footprint. And at least think about it. I hope this panel has been able to give you some food for thought. And so my sincere thanks to all three of you. Take care, stay safe. Very enjoyable.